Okay, today we're going to be looking at our last lesson in Chapter 3 on adding and subtracting decimals. And today we're going to look at methods we can use to find decimal sums and differences and talk about some different strategies that we can use to make our problems a little bit simpler. To start with, we have a story problem, and it says, at a track meet, Stephen entered the long jump. His jumps were 2 and 25 hundredths meters, 1 and 81 hundredths meters, and 3 and 75 hundredths meters. What was the total distance Stephen jumped? Well, when we look at these numbers, hopefully what we can see is that if we add together these 2500s plus these 7500s, that's going to equal 1. It's going to give us a whole number, and our decimals are just going to be places are just going to be filled with zeros. We can change the order of our add-ins by using the commutative property, just like we did with whole numbers. So when we do this problem, I would want to do it in this order as opposed to the original order, because here I am able to use some mental math to put this together, right? Like 25 and 75. 25 is like 1/4, 75 is like 3/4, and 3 plus 1 is 4/4. And we all know that that gives us 1 whole, right? So I'm going to put that up here, right? Because 25 hundredths plus 75 hundredths equals 1. Well, 2 plus 1 is 3, and 3 plus 3 is 6, right? So these two add-ins come together to equal 6. And 6 plus 1 and 81 hundredths. Well, 6 plus 1 is easy. That's 7. So we get 7 and 81 hundredths. So again, we're rearranging, we're using the commutative property so that we can put together our numbers that are going to add up to whole numbers. And we can redo that one by looking at it like this way, right? So that hopefully we can maybe see it a little bit easier, right? But if we put these two together first, right, we know that 75 hundredths plus 25 hundredths equals 1. 81 hundredths plus no hundredths is 81 hundredths. And then 2 plus 1 is 3, plus 3 more is 6, plus 1 more is 7. So we're just going to use the commutative property, change them around. Now remember, this only works with addition. We cannot use this strategy with subtraction, because in subtraction, order of course matters. Now, one thing we can do when we're working with subtraction, though, is we can kind of manipulate our numbers just a little bit to make our math a little bit easier, right? So if we think about this problem, right, here we have $22.50 minus $8.99. Well, if I change this to 9 by just adding 1 penny, I can accommodate for that by adding 1 penny to this problem, right? So I would turn this into 22.51, right? Because both of these numbers I added 1 to, I'm going to get the same answer. But on the second problem, I don't have to do any regrouping, right? 1 minus 0 is 1. 5 minus 0 is 5. I mean, I do have to do some regrouping when I get over here into the ones place, but I don't have to do nearly as much regrouping. 2 minus 9 is 3, and 1 minus nothing is 1. Now, just to prove to you that this idea works, right, we can take 2250, subtract 899, right? This would be a 10, this would become a 4. Well, 10 minus 9 is 1. Right, this would become a 1, and that would be 14. 14 minus 9 is 5. And then this, of course, becomes a 1, and that's a 1. And 11 minus 8 is 3. 1 minus nothing is 1. And you'll see that these two numbers are the same. Now, the only reason why this works is because when we were doing this problem over here, we made sure to add 1/100th to both of these numbers. Because we did that, we're not changing the difference, right? And we can kind of look at this idea with like whole numbers, right? If we had 7 minus 6, we can easily see that that is 1. Well, if I change both of these by adding like 10 to them, 7 plus 10 is 17, 6 plus 10 is 16, and 17 minus 16 is still just 1, right? So as long as we manipulate them both in the same manner, we're going to end up with the same answer, right? And the reason why this is important is because here, right, if we look at this 99 and we think, oh, well, if I just add 1/100th to it, it's 9, right? And I get rid of those 9s in the decimal places, making my problem quite a bit easier. So if you're not sure, like if you're having some questions about that, rewind it and look back to when we first started this problem and see if it kind of makes a little bit more sense. All right, another thing that I want to talk to you about, right? This is a story problem. We're kind of going to ignore the story problem, but it's a subtraction problem. And we can do this subtraction problem. It's pretty basic, right? They've lined up our decimals for us. We do have to do some regrouping, right? 11 minus 4 is 7. We do a little bit more regrouping. 12 minus 4 is 8, right? And so the answer is 87/100ths. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Lovett, why didn't we just change this one the way that we changed the last one, right? So that we ended up with a whole number here on the bottom. And the reason why is because here it doesn't make much sense, right? Like we have to think a little bit harder about like what do we have to add to 44/100ths to equal 1? And the answer would be what, like 56/100ths? And then we would have to add 56/100ths up here, and it would work, but it would be quite a bit more like effort, right? Like it would, like I said, it would work, right? If we add 56/100ths here, that becomes 8. And then we'd have to add 56/100ths here, and that's 7 and 8 and 87/100ths, which gives us an answer of 87/100. So again, it would work, but the effort to try to figure out like, well, what do we have to add so that it's a whole number, and then adding that odd bit to this, like just doesn't pay off in the end. Sometimes it's worth just doing the subtraction. But one thing I want to talk to you about is how do we use a calculator in order to do subtraction and addition with decimals? And what we need to do is we need to enter our numbers in order, right? So we had 8 and 31/100ths. So we have 8. Now this right here, this is our decimal, and 31/100ths. And you'll see that the decimal place is up here in our problem. Then we click on the subtraction problem, and now we enter our second number, so 7, and then it's always important. We have to make sure that we click on that decimal, because if we don't do it, then our decimal point doesn't end up in the right spot, right? Like if I forget to click on it and then I do this, I'm going to get an answer that's really, really wrong, right? I get negative 735. That is nowhere close to what we got, right? And the reason why is because I forgot to click on my decimal in my answer. So 8 and 31/100ths minus 7 and 44/100ths. And then I just click on the equal sign, and there we go. So I'm not necessarily encouraging you to use your calculator to do your homework. I am encouraging you to use it occasionally to check your work, and also make sure that you have good practice so that you know how to use the decimal point in your work with a calculator. All right, let's move on with our lesson. And we're just going to do some problems, right? So here we have 4 and 19/100ths plus 58 hundredths. I'm going to rewrite this one over here. Always important that I line up my decimal and make sure that I pay attention to the fact that I'm adding. 9 plus 8 is 17. And I regroup. 5 plus 1 plus 1 is 7. I make sure my decimal goes in my answer, and I get 4 77 hundredths. Looking at another one, here we have 3 add-ins. Now remember, because we're adding, we can change the order, and I see here that I have 7/10 and 3/10, and 7/10 and 3/10 is going to equal 1, right? So I'm going to ignore the decimals, and I'm going to say, well, 6 plus 7 plus 1 is 14, and 14 plus 2 is 16 and 98 hundredths. So let's do that one kind of over here to the side so that we can maybe look at it a little bit easier, right? So as soon as we see that this 3 and this 7 come together to equal 1 whole, right, we can now ignore this decimal place, and now we just add up all of our whole numbers, right? 6 plus 1 is 7. 7 plus 7 is 14. 14 plus 2 is 16. And then because we don't have any decimals left in these numbers over here, right, we just tack the 98 hundredths onto the end. Last set of problems that we're going to look at, I just want to get back to this, are these, right? So here they want us to find the missing number. So here we have n, which stands for number, minus 9 2 hundredths equals 3 85 hundredths. Well, if I subtract this from this, right, then if I add these two parts back together, it should give me my answer. So I get 9 2 hundredths plus 3 85 hundredths, and 2 plus 5 is 7, 8 plus nothing is 8, 9 plus 3 is 12. So in this case, n equals 12 and 87 hundredths. We're going to look at another one here, right? So here we have, just erase that so I have room to work. Here we have n plus 3, or 31 and 53 hundredths equals 6 and 20, or 62 and 4/10. So this plus this equaled this, right? So if I take 31 and 53 hundredths and subtract it from 62 and 4/10, and I should get my answer. Now here, there's nothing in this place, so I'm going to fill it in with a 0. This becomes a 3, so I can do my regrouping. 10 minus 3 is 7. I need to do a little bit more regrouping. 13 minus 5 is 8. Don't forget your decimal. 1 minus 1 is 0, and 6 minus 3 is 3. So the answer here is that n equals 30 and 87 hundredths, right? Because if I added these two pieces together, I would get that. All right, our last one is, oh, come on, move over for me, is right here. So I wanted to look at this one because it has 3 add-ins and they equal 20 and 8/10. So just quickly looking at how do we solve this? Well, I know that if I add all 3 of these together, it's going to equal this. So I'm going to start off by adding these two numbers together. 9 and 2/10 plus 8 and 4/10, right? 2 plus 4 is 6. 9 plus 8 is 17, right? So 17 and 6/10 plus n is going to equal 20 and 8/10. So that means that I can take 20 and 8/10 and subtract from it 17 and 6/10. 8 minus 6 is 2. Don't forget your decimal. 20 minus 17 is 3. So in this case, 3 and 2/10 equals n. Now, if I wanted to check this, I could take 3 and 2/10 and add it to 17 and 6/10, and it would give me 20 and 8 tenths, and that's how I would know that my answer was correct. All right, so those are just some tips and strategies that we can use when working with decimals to try to make our math a little bit easier and take up a little bit less time. Give these tricks a try.